ago too.
Yeah, something. Thank you. Yes, we're ancient.
Well, so I will introduce everybody else here. Rebecca is the one who hosts these on her Zoom account. And Lisa was actually the one who sort of had the idea to start this book club. And then Chris is living in Minnesota, but actually from England. Although you've been here, what, like 18 years, I think?
Yeah.
And he is also a member of our writers group. And if the dog gets too annoying, put her out. She sees a dog outside. Or I'll try and remember to use this mute button.
This is more of a horse than a dog, by the way. Not a dog.
She is. Maybe I'll turn the camera and get her over here. She's actually small for her breed. Yeah, if you could get her to go out, she just sees a dog. She's getting wound up. She's a very, very quiet dog until she sees other dogs. But she's an Irish Wolfhound. She was bred to hunt wolves, so that's kind of her thing. So, Dan, do you want to introduce your book? Give kind of a synopsis for everybody. I think maybe about half or just a little over half of us here have read the book. Lisa, did you get a chance to read it?
I did read it. I got, you know, we're moving, so I got to about, I suppose about 85% of it. And then I had to skip to the end to get the end. So I missed a little bit of it, but.
That'll be confusing for you then.
And Chris, did you read it?
I did read it, yes.
Fantastic. Becky?
I did not have a chance. I'm sorry. I really wanted to. I gave it to my brother-in-law, who is German, and his father was worked on, you know, was a soldier on the Russian front, so he really related to it.
Nice.
And he just loved it. So I want to read it for sure, but didn't get to yet.
You know, one thing that was when I was trying to sell this to a New York publisher, I got an agent who was also had grown up in post-war Germany. And she was really into it. She said, "Oh, this felt so real. How long did you spend in Germany?" It's like,
Yeah.
you know, that's the beauty of the internet, I guess.
Yeah.
I spent some time in Germany just this last year with some friends there, and I was able to talk to the grandmother of one of our friends, and she remembers the war, and her husband was a child in the war, but remembers it and remembers what is happening. And I asked her how Germans feel about it. You know, I was really tactful, but I said, you know, the German people I know are beautiful, wonderful people, and yet this horrible, terrible thing happened. And she started crying and talked about the collective shame that all Germans carry because of this. And I thought your book really did a good job of portraying how, you know, that scene, how people just go along. The scene that you had where he's going to see Sylvia, the girlfriend, and he comes across this group of kids beating up this elderly couple.
Right.
And he feels like somebody should do something, but nobody's doing anything, and he just watched it. And
you know, one of the things about to me, that's a really consequential scene in the book. And one of the things about that was just like, I wanted to write it in a way that's relatable, because like, gee, I remember being in high school and seeing cruelty and not interfering and not doing anything about it. And so like, you know, and I still to this day think, gee, I wish I had, why wasn't I more, you know, why couldn't I just go in and say what I thought? You know, why did I stand there? But, you know, it makes you think like, well, really, these were human beings, and they reacted, I mean, obviously there were some pretty depraved people among them, but the majority, you know, were just reacting as human beings.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just him, it was the neighbors, the friends, all standing around watching it happen. Right. And all feeling horrible and all doing nothing. And I think it's very real.
That's the power of silence, that until one person speaks up and says this is wrong, everybody else looks at these silent people and goes, well, nobody else is saying anything. Maybe I'm the oddball out who thinks that this is wrong.
And they were afraid
Right.
for themselves, you know. I thought it was just really scary to think how close all of us could come to being those bystanders and not doing anything.
I mean, the other thing you think about is just like how fragile civilization is. You know, we think that we're immune to it, but you know, democracy is this amazing, wonderful thing, and it's always sort of in peril. And
I've been watching this,
very fragile.
I think it's HBO, The Plot Against America, based on the Philip Roth novel. And it's very good. It's very, very well done by the people who did The Wire. And it's about Lindbergh, as if what would happen if Lindbergh had won the presidency over Roosevelt in 1940, and on an anti-Semitic sort of platform. So it sort of raises all those issues, and it's a little bit resonant today, unfortunately.
So Dan, what first put the idea of this novel in your head?
Well, you know, even before this call, I assumed I'm going to be asked that, and I tried to remember, and it's really hard. It's not only that it's been a long time, but I'm not even sure what the answer is. I literally wrote and for those who didn't read it, there's really there's a lot of different time periods, but there's two main ones. One is the sort of the island of these survivors, and it's sort of in the present, and the main character is this old man, and he's looking back on his life, and his life starts in Nazi Germany. He eventually emigrates to the United States, but most of the book takes place in Nazi Germany, and it's really about this expansive, very complicated life, and how, you know, it's sort of a story of the whole, I wanted it at least to sort of be a story of the whole century in this one life. Whether it is or not, I don't know. But so I wrote I remember writing the island scene, and I wrote that mostly for humor. And a lot of the island still is, you know, kind of humor and ironic and a little weird and not totally realistic. And then I knew I had this vision of this old guy, and I wanted to have him have this long, involved life full of adventure and episodes. But I really didn't have any plan for what those were. And then I literally just wrote that, well, maybe I'll start his life in Germany. And I wrote this first scene of his mother being a pain in the neck at the restaurant and ordering. And I felt like,
his mother is great.
Hey, that came out well. And I really liked it because it was so different from what you normally read. Because like you get these oversimplified, either they were all, you know, Nazi killer robots, or, you know, there were some anti-fascists, but
The resistance.
but they were actually real human beings, and they could be a pain in the neck in some way that has nothing to do with their politics, you know. So I really liked that scene with the mother in the restaurant. And then, I don't know, from there, I think what happened after that was I decided, okay, if I'm going to set some of this in Germany, I need to actually learn about it. So I went to the library, and of course, it's really easy to find the political history. People have written tons of political history, who invaded who on what date and all that. But what the experience of really living there was like is, you know, I wound up getting out all these memoirs, you know, of people who'd grown up in Germany at the time. And then that's when it really hit me that, wow, this is an amazing perspective that most Americans don't know. You know, that, you know, we think of it as like they had the Blitzkrieg and they were invincible until Russia and everything. But from their perspective, it's like they had a few victories, and then there was this endless years of disaster, you know, and this slow, bitter collapse and everything, and hunger all through Germany. And so that I felt like was just so interesting that I wanted to, you know, do more with it.
I thought it worked really well because it was a perspective that we don't hear a lot of. We hear a lot of the suffering that the Jews had, and then we hear a lot of, you know, kind of people that hid them, and the sympathizers and the people that, you know, tried to help them survive. but we don't hear, and we hear a lot of the evil villains, but we don't hear about how it was just to be an average person.
Yeah, and there were a couple of
Surviving.
memoirs that were by, just average Germans, and you can tell sometimes if they're trying to hide something, but most of them, they were very believable, and they were just so fascinating.
I'm kind of curious, because my experience in college was that one of my German professors was Jewish. They were both of an age that they had lived in Germany in those years and remembered those years. The woman was Jewish, and the man had actually been in the Hitler Youth. And there was some discussion of that, and I think that's sort of the first time in my life that
Yeah.
I really started to understand. I mean, I might have a little bit before, I probably knew a little bit more because I had lived in Germany, but I think that was the point where I really became very conscious that just because someone was in the Hitler Youth did not mean that they had been an evil person, where I really started to understand more of the depth that they had no choice.
They had no choice, and particularly the Hitler Youth later in the war, it was a brainwashing from a very young age, and like in many closed societies, they were told to tell on their parents. Like they were indoctrinated in school. And by the way, if your parents say something like this, we want to know about it. So it was pretty intense mind control.
So what sorts of memoirs did you read? Were you reading like from people who had been in the Nazis?
There were all different ones. There was one person had put together a collection of children's experiences during the war. That was really interesting. One was this guy who'd been a sort of similar to Hans. He had been a sort of low-level soldier that just had no particular political feeling, but he did go along with it, and mainly, hey, it's our patriotic duty because now Germany's threatened ultimately and stuff. And then there were others. There was a fascinating one by one who really, and this was really interesting because he wrote a diary at the time, so it's not an after the fact trying to whitewash anything. He was keeping a diary in the 1930s of everything, and he was incredibly insightful and despised Hitler, and he wound up fleeing to England. And the whole story of his diary is interesting because nobody knew it existed until I can't remember the whole story, but his son found it in his desk, and wound
After
up,
he had died?
I can't remember if it was after he had died, but I think it was.
What was his name?
Oh my God. Sebastian something, I think. I'll come up with it. It was really, really interesting because he was just incredibly perceptive about everything that was going on, and he talked about and people, it was so perceptive that when the diary came out, people challenged, like nobody really could have seen all that in 1935, but they were able to prove and document that no, this was really written during those years. But he was, my country's gone mad and I don't understand it, and how can they possibly be following this lunatic, and
And just by writing that diary, he could have been killed.
Yeah.
If it had been discovered at the time.
Yeah.
How did he get out to England?
He got out before the war. So
Okay.
one of the weird things was, and I wish I could remember his name, he was imprisoned in England for a year because they were worried that he was a German spy.
Right.
Well, I think one of the things about the book, going back to the book, that made Hans so much more sympathetic. I think it's so difficult to write about somebody who's fighting for the Nazis, but because he dislikes Hitler and he's able to make fun of him in this clandestine way with his father and the letters back and forth, so that they are clearly criticizing Hitler by using exaggerated, saying how wonderful he is. And I thought, well, that's interesting to have somebody who is fighting for the Germans, but is completely against the government. And how often does that happen? Are there, you know, were the Americans in the Vietnam War, were many of them feeling like, what are we doing here? And this is stupid, but there they are, and it's a job, they have to do it. So that was an interesting twist that I liked.
I think that's a very generous reading of what he was doing, Anne. I think that this man is driven by self-preservation. He killed a
I
duck.
was going to say, I didn't think of him entirely as
The feet say run, Anne. The feet say run. I would say that everything that drives this man is self-preservation. And even joining the Wehrmacht, and he was just lucky to end up being a driver. I mean, this man is all about self-preservation, isn't he? He even kills a poor man who's half dead to save himself. I mean, this is a man driven by self-preservation.
Right, but he still did not.
He didn't join the Lord of Hitler to fight. Although he didn't like Hitler.
I agree.
He didn't like Hitler because he was going to get him killed.
Right, you could argue that he was a coward.
Oh,
but,
yeah, he's that.
You know, compared to his mother and her political leanings.
But his mother is exactly the same. He got everything who he is from his mother. His mother is the same animal in a different leaning. I see him and his mother. I see him like a direct. His mother's exactly the same. So she jumps from one bed to the other. And when the Russian comes, she jumps in bed with him because she'll be saved by the Russian. He is a chip off the old female block, is that
But
boy.
at the same time, I mean, it's hard for us to fathom, but during a world war, you know,
Oh, don't get me wrong.
preservation is,
Don't get me wrong, Janet. I'm not judging him as a bad person. I'm just trying to assess his character for who he is.
And that was one of the questions. Everyone who read the book, how harshly do you judge Hans?
Right.
Does not think much of him.
He didn't change after the war, though, did he? Much.
I have to say, I kept trying throughout the whole book to like this guy. I kept trying to find redeeming qualities, and I just don't like him.
Dan, I have a
He's
question
just
for you.
not a good person.
I have a question for you, Dan.
Yeah.
So you call this thing Feet Say Run.
Yes.
You called him Hans.
Yes.
Is that kind of a little joke on your part?
Oh, no, I didn't think of that at all.
I mean, I was almost thinking you should call him Richard, because the only thing he ever seems to think about is something between his legs. He seems completely obsessed about recreating himself, but I was just kind of interested about this guy because he's very self-obsessed all the time, and self-preservation is all
to
the
me,
thing.
there was another theme. I read it a while ago. I can't remember all the details, but to me, a theme running through it is how people are shattered by war, and, you know, judging someone's character who's been through that, you know, would that have been the person he would have been in normal circumstances? And
That's true, but he didn't get to war
You know.
until he was older, did he?
well, I mean, people who, you know, I mean, when I was growing up, like, people had been in the war, and it's hard to fathom what that must have been like, and depending, you know, no matter what your role was, but
I'm judging, I think, Janet, from the way he despised his father and he despised his mother, even before he got to the point of the war. You know? I think he had already made very strong judgments about who he was and about what he did. The war, of course, highlighted parts of his character, as it often does, of course. Things like trauma bring out parts of your character, or they highlight them, or they magnify them. Yes, absolutely. You get into a traumatic situation and it creates something else. I think this is a character we're talking about, not a person. We're not judging his morals in that sense, but it's trying to assess what he was and who he was as a person in the book, really, I think, trying to understand him. The way he dealt with Hilda, the way he dealt with his own mother, the way he dealt with his son, all of those things, you know, they come out.
yeah. Dan, what are your,
Yeah, what do you think, Dan?
I don't judge him quite the same way.
You're quite amoral about him.
I mean,
Can I say something?
Yeah, Catherine.
It's interesting to hear you, because one of the things I found that I liked about there was a nuance about the character.
Oh, you need to watch your microphone, Catherine. It's kind of buzzing.
Sorry, it may not work, but I'm having trouble with my computer, so if this is bad, I'll
Okay.
just.
yeah, you're getting a lot of, you maybe need to get further from it. I don't know.
Well, you know what?
Oh, there you go.
You can respond to that. I was just going to mention that I was interested in the scene in
That's
Italy,
it. Yes, that was interesting. Yes.
and that's a sort of
Yeah, I mean,
nuance. It's a
I think
twist on
there's
the.
Italy
Well, and also the farmers.
Poland, in Poland, he refuses to kill the prisoners.
Yes.
Right,
That's
that's
certainly
what I
not
thought. I thought,
self-preservation.
I think he's human, and I think you could say he's a coward, but I also think that he did care. I mean, there's no question he cared. He cared about, for him to refuse, that was not selfless. That was something that could have gotten him killed, and he got to the point where he just didn't care anymore. You have to do what's right. If they kill him, they kill him. And there was a young boy that he sort of watched out for in the war, and was the one with the girlfriend that was very sad that obviously this girl just blew him off.
You mean Dieter in North Africa?
Yeah, he has a heart. I don't judge him nearly as harshly as you do. I see different sides. I mean, there's a lot of things you can say about him. He is selfish. But I think he's also very caring and has a very sensitive heart sometimes.
Worst
But
thing
then he did
You're so
walk
kind,
right in
Ann.
the line and participate in that gang rape of those two Italian girls without even much remorse or guilt or thinking about it. He just,
See,
like Chris said, it's all about like his self gratification or his.
I read that scene as he's a dumb kid who really doesn't understand. I mean, if I remember the scene, Dan, I thought those were like two women who kind of came and did it for money.
Yeah, that was
The women were partisans. They were Italian partisans who were.
Yeah, this is a different scene.
This is a different
I'm
scene.
sorry.
That's those are the prostitutes we're talking about
Okay.
there,
Oh,
aren't we?
the prostitute.
Yeah, that's different, Lisa.
Oh,
This is a
sorry.
bit later on in the book, Lisa, where there are two partisan girls offering food, but they want money and they haven't got money. And the guy who's with Hans, he tries to basically muscle in and get the food off
Okay.
them, even with menaces. And actually Hans kind of says, "Nine, don't do this." And just at that point, the two girls' friends come up behind them with guns. And, the kind of things, those kind of little things that you put in there, Dan, it kind of made me think, this kind of seems inconsistent with his character. But you might be right. Maybe he's changing. Maybe the hardship has
I
turned
don't
his
see it.
character.
It is inconsistent. I see it as being how probably at least 85% of the world is going to act, because this is a kid. I mean, he's like 13 when this starts. He's been brainwashed. He's been subject to propaganda. He's being told his country is under attack. His mother is pressuring him. The whole town sees him as the coward because he's the only one not going to war. When he does go to war, he never kills anyone. He does do some good things. I see this as a 13-year-old kid who's just trying to outrun the avalanche that's bearing down on him every second of the way. And he's still trying. And I think, unfortunately, most people are not going to be a hero consistently. And they're going to struggle with the fear and what's really going on, and how can I even do anything about this? So I like Ann, I judge him a little less harshly. I think he's somebody who was very unfortunate to be born in the time he was in, and he wasn't always admirable, but I think he tells us the truth about what most people are like. And I think that's a good thing, because anybody who reads this is going to be forced to say, would I behave differently? And to think and project into the future. What if someday I am in that situation? And when we start thinking like that, we're much more likely to do the heroic thing if we're ever in the position. So I liked all of
Yeah, in some way, that's the definition of a tragic figure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, the one thing he does, the worst thing he does is with his own son. I mean, I think he
Is what? I couldn't hear
is
you.
with his own son. He does abandon his own son, and he says himself, I'm sorry if you got to like me, but I'm, and the other thing that he himself feels guilty about, obviously, the whole time, is having fled with Sylvia. But to me, that's a much more ambiguous situation, because he was trying to make a split-second judgment about.
Yeah, that I understand.
And he clearly judged wrong after the fact. He could see that it was the wrong judgment, but at the time he didn't necessarily know. So he feels
And he
that
also didn't have all the information.
didn't have all the
Sorry, I'll be right back.
information.
He didn't have all the information.
Sorry, I'll be right back. Hello?
And he was young.
Yeah, he's a kid at
when he
that
left
point.
Sylvia, you
Right. Right.
you understand and can almost forgive him for that.
Yeah.
He's a kid at that
He
point.
doesn't forgive himself for that. He does not forgive himself. That is
No,
one.
not at all.
I mean, again and again and again. Why didn't I go back? Why didn't I look back? Why didn't I mean? He's just obsessed with beating himself up for that, which kind of also counters the he's just a jerk. He does whatever is his best self-interest. Maybe he does, but he feels guilty about it, so it's not as bad.
But
Sorry,
he does
food
anything
delivery.
he doesn't feel guilty about throughout the novel as well.
He's interestingly juxtaposed against somebody like Andreas, for example, who is incredibly noble and giving and sacrificial.
Right.
And even to somebody who, like Hans, who, wouldn't even step over him kind of thing, but Andreas shines again and again and again as almost like the antithesis to this guy. Whereas Hans, thinks basically about whatever he can get from anybody, takes a kidney from a lady and thinks nothing of it. She needed money and I needed a kidney. It's a fair transaction. What's the problem? In fact, I found it was illegal, so I married her. And then I divorced her. No big. What's the problem? This is the kind of guy he is, I mean, to him, it's just, I needed it. She had it. I had the money. She didn't. Bada boom, bada bing. We're off. He's a great guy.
And Dan, I want to get this question in here. There's striking contrasts in tone and subject between the island and the story as it proceeds through Germany and the war. I want to ask the readers, did you find these jarring? And Dan, what was your purpose in that contrast in tone and subject?
You want me to go first, or you want?
Yeah, you go first.
Go for it, bud.
Part of it is just purely like something really silly. Like, I feel like you need comic relief. Like, the Germany is so intense that you just, after a while, you need to step away from it and come back to the present. And the present is not quite as dreadful, and there's some humor in it. Beyond that, I don't. To me, it's like, if I want to get really artsy creative, I guess it's like, the world is insane, and you can see it as a great tragedy or a great comedy. And the Germany part is the madness of the world as a tragedy, and the island is the madness of the world as a comedy, kind of, I guess.
I think that too. And so the question for all the readers was, did you find it jarring to go back and forth? And for me, I didn't. I think it worked exactly as you wanted it to. And I think it also highlighted that, in a sense, people are absurd throughout history and any time and place. And we see this absolute horror in the Nazi story, and even in Iowa, where everything that happens in Iowa has its own absurdity. But then you get to this island, you've got only 7 people, and they're still being absurd. And there's the humor because they can't do too much damage. I mean, I guess the 2 take the boat and run away, but I think it worked as you intended it to. And I think it also brought out that this is human nature and we can't get away from it.
Right. To me, like, what were their names again? The cousins who leave on the boat.
Conrad
And Cole. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
they imagine them continuing to just go on with the same argument on their stupid lifeboat, even as they sort of basically starve to death.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it really matters.
Sort of the ultimate human nature, that we're just doomed to our pettiness.
Yeah, I didn't find it jarring. I think in a way, each setting sort of brought the other setting into sharp relief because they're so different and the time period was so different. But I thought it worked well.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite books is Burgess's Earthly Powers. And there was little hints towards, I don't know if you've read that book, anybody here?
Anthony Burgess? I'm sorry, what was it?
Yeah, Burgess, yeah. If you get a chance to read it, guys, do. You'll love it, I'm sure. But it has a similar thing. It follows basically the life of a homosexual writer who witnessed a miracle, maybe. And he's being asked to verify this so that they can basically make a saint out of this guy. And he basically recounts his whole life, and he goes back and forth. And it just so happens this guy lived through many different periods and interesting times of life, including Nazi Germany, in fact.
Yeah.
And it goes through his whole life back and forth, culminating in the kind of the Jonestown massacre. And it's an astonishing book. It's polyglottal. It's got the whole range of interesting things.
It sounds like a kind of book. What was the title?
Earthly Powers.
That sounds like something I would like.
You would love it. It's an incredible book. But it does the same thing. It hops back and forth between his existence now and some of the amazing things he did through his life as a character. And so, no, I don't find it jarring. I think it's a very useful device. I had to kind of watch myself in the end. It's like when he was talking about Sylvia and meeting up in Baltimore and all that stuff. And, oh, did he really? Did he not? And picking up on the delirium of what was going on there at the end.
Right.
So that was the only thing that threw me a little bit, but yeah, got it in the end. So
I remember saying to Danny about the contrast with the island and Germany was, I can't remember exactly how I phrased it to Danny, but it struck me that the whole book in his past life, he's running away, trying to get somewhere. And then he's on this island and he's completely stuck.
Right.
yeah.
I remember, I don't know if that's exactly how I phrased it.
I remember that, and I remember, Laura, you also, like, one of your things was you wanted that couple sentences that brought that out in a certain way that brought the title out, kind of. You know,
Yeah, I remember
he's
talking.
running, and then he's stuck on the island. He's done running, kind of.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he finally really makes a decision to take care of somebody.
Mhm.
I know you and I had talked about the original ending was
Right.
much more tragic.
Yes. Well, Anne, I think you read Anne read an even earlier version, and she was like, "This is the darkest ending. You cannot end it like this. You need to give some."
It wasn't
kind of
particularly cheery as it was it?
hope." No, it still wasn't.
As he fades into the beach.
You can just imagine what it was before
Changing that.
before two different people said you need to do something here.
People were killing themselves as they read it.
Exactly. Like even in Shakespeare, after 19 people are dead, you have a little bit of hope at the end. Like just
Well-
give them that much.
We did have two main arguments about the book. The one I won and one I lost. The one I won was that ending has to go.
Yes.
It's too intense. It's too dark. You have to change it. The other one has to do with the point that you just made about the change in the island and the transition. I appreciated very much that after a particularly intense Germany scene that we had the island, because it gave me a break. It was a relief. It was comic relief. I always looked forward to the island scenes until we got to the island scene where there was that monsoon, and I felt betrayed. Like, you can't do that to me. You can't make the island
Because
scene.
the island is supposed to be your relief, and now
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And then you
that's becoming
turned it
horrible.
into, and you wouldn't let up. It was awful and raining and everyone was dying and Monique was dead with her placenta hanging out or whatever. It was horrible.
It was a little harsh.
And I said, that has to go. And I lost that argument.
I think it would have, I don't know, if the island was like this perfect little place, I think that would have been too artificial.
Well, people were
Yeah, I
dying.
think it was
all
beautifully
the
written
time.
and the transitions were fantastic. I really enjoyed
Oh, thank you.
the juxtaposition of that. I thought it was great.
You see that, Anne? So you lost that one, but I got
There you
that.
go.
She didn't say
There
she
you go.
liked the monsoon scene. She just
No,
said she
I
liked
heard
the,
she liked the monsoon. That's what I heard.
I didn't hear
It
that.
was real. It was real. You
Danny,
could feel it.
Did I win to take out was it India? Take out the India part? Or,
Yes, you won that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it
no
wasn't,
India.
I have to break it to you, it wasn't because of you.
Well, I helped.
You helped.
That brings the question, did anyone find, Lisa found the island very real. Did anyone find it too fantastical? Did it require a suspension of disbelief at all?
Yeah, I mean, there was like a fantasy side to me.
I mean, I to be honest, I've heard that as a criticism from some readers that
Have you?
Germany feels so real and the island feels like it's more make-believe. And
Why did they feel that way?
I mean, I think there's an element of truth to it. Germany is more realism, and the island takes more of a suspension of disbelief. You know, where is this island, and how come it's uncharted in 2000?
These are people who grew up watching Gilligan's Island. Of course it's believable.
Apparently not. If they watch Gilligan's Island, they know that happens all the time.
If they watched Gilligan's Island, they were like, why don't you just get a couple of coconuts and build a boat?
Exactly.
You know what, I like Lisa. I mean, I found it realistic mostly, you know, because
Yeah.
they do have to figure out how to eat. They do make mistakes, and, you know, first they're trying to run after the birds and catch them,
Right.
stone them, and then they figure out, you know, we can trap a couple and, you know, trap enough till we get a male and a female together, and, you know, they're learning. The only issue that you have was, I think you wrote this maybe a little bit before GPS was quite as common.
Yeah.
That discussion that technology
Yeah.
changed on you while you were writing it. And that's the only thing that makes it just a little bit harder to believe.
Right.
And that's
Definitely.
the fault of technology, not you.
It's the nature of the beast. I reread something else I had written recently, and it was like, I hadn't written it that long ago. It was a much lighter thing set in Hollywood, and you know, these characters are reading a magazine, and it's like, who's reading nobody reads magazines now. Like, why aren't they on their iPad? You know?
Yeah.
Like,
It
the whole
took me
world has
the
changed
longest
so
time.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kept writing in my novel, and then he hung up the phone, and I had to tell myself, and
Oh yeah.
I'd catch it again. Nobody hangs up a phone.
Yeah.
Well, like people our age, I'll say I dialed the wrong number.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's
So
amazing.
another question, there are a few important moments of bitter irony, like when he's throwing the snowballs at Hitler and the Hitler salute to the wrong army, which is when the little boy finally gets the Heil Hitler right and he does it to the wrong army.
That was dark.
Oh, that
That
was,
was-
it
that
was
was hard.
Sad.
It was believable. Hans
Yeah.
13 saying Heil Hitler to Sylvia. The
Poor
mother
Georg.
worried about what to order at a restaurant that's about to be destroyed. Was there a message from these? What was the point of all the twists and ironies, Dan?
To me, it all comes back. Like, here's where the Germany and the island come together, because it's like, the world is crazy. You know, everything is, you know, we go through it with the illusion that everything's reasonable and we're rational and other people are rational, and really, like, it's like there's a kind of semi-controlled madness that we're all fighting through, I guess, you know. But I will say the one that you guys responded to is like really harsh. I agree. Like the kid getting killed is pretty, anything that involves a kid
Yeah, that was intense.
getting killed is
It is,
borderline
but
intense.
I think that's part of why I like this book is because it doesn't sugarcoat things, you know.
Yeah.
May find it dark, but this is an interesting conversation that when I first started Books and Brews, this would have been the second interview I ever did on that program when we were still at the radio station. I forget who, it wasn't an author we had, but our guest was actually my boss at Kramer School of Music, who is from Russia. And he was talking about the difference between American stories, American modern novels, and Russian novels. And he was saying, you know, in America, you want all your movies to have a happy ending. You want all your books to end with, you know, an upbeat and cheer and hope. And he said in Russia, our stories are often very dark. You know, Little Red Riding Hood gets eaten by the wolf or whatever. You know, he was talking about one story where it's the fisherman who gets the wishes and the wife keeps wanting more and more and more until the fish finally just says, you're back to the beginning, you're back to having nothing. It doesn't end happily. And he said, you know, that's important. because when kids grow up, an entire society grows up with nothing but happy endings, they get a very skewed view of life. And the Russian stories not only are saying, you can't expect life to be perfect and happy, they're also teaching lessons like, don't be a stupid little girl and go out in the woods with the wolf when your mother told you not to. So I think it may be heavy, it may be intense when this little boy gets shot, but I think it's so real. And every single person in that scene, to me, was so human. None of them were pure evil. I mean, they were these drunk soldiers who were in a foreign country, who didn't speak the language, were afraid, was somebody going to try and kill them? I mean, everybody in that scene had their own fears. They were probably very, possibly 17-year-old boys. To me, it was real.
You wrote it so well, too, because you could just feel the little boy's confusion. He couldn't understand why everybody wasn't proud of him. Finally, he was getting it right, and he kept doing it.
So well.
Like, you guys don't get it. I'm finally doing it right. Why is everybody upset? Yeah, it was well done.
So how does this book relate to the question we're always told as writers, write what you know? Where did you find the balance between write what you know and go beyond what you know?
I'm actually kind of interested, since you guys are writers, what your own feeling is. But I think this was the first, no, it wasn't the first thing I wrote that completely departed. But, I think when you're younger, we're mostly more you're like out of college and you want to be a writer, but you're really still so trapped in your own angst and everything that's going on inside you. And what it really means is you just want to write about your own life and your own feelings and everything. And then if you still continue as we get older to want to be a writer, which I did, and enjoy the actual craft of writing, then you probably need to start looking at stories that are a little bit outside of you. And so for me, this was this was kind of like, it wasn't the first time I'd done it, but it was the first time I'd done it with a series. I'd done a comedy that had nothing to do with me, but this was the first one that really felt like, oh wow, I can actually do something that isn't just about like a version of me as the narrator, kind of telling a version of my life or something, or some part of it. I don't know if you guys have had that kind of, or where you are with that, or.
That's an interesting question. Janet and Ann, are you also writers?
Ann's not. Janet writes a bit, but more children's stories, if I remember. But she stepped away also anyway.
Yeah, I noticed.
And I know you probably never did that, Laura, because you do like, time travel.
I would, and this again is probably why so much. Because when I think about the Bluebells Chronicles, I don't think they're about me at all. They're from years of looking at human nature. And your book is so much, beyond the story itself, it is an observation of human nature, of how we behave, of our foibles, of our insanity, that even trapped on a desert island, they're arguing about capital gains or something like that. But that's exactly how people are. So, no, my books are not about myself. They're very much the same thing. Looking at how people behave, why people are the way they are. So what about the rest of you?
Oh, I would have to say mine are likely more from within me than from just my pure imagination. I think what I write is more like write what you know kind of thing.
Yeah. Somebody once described it as like some writers stay home and others like take you out. I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't remember exactly how it was phrased, but it was interesting.
Well, I wrote one children's book about my mother and my aunt, so it was sort of what you know. But I've been writing this nonfiction book about some Irish grocery store workers. I'm writing it for children who went on a strike, an anti-apartheid strike in the 1980s. So I definitely don't know that. Like, I had to do what Danny did. I had to do a lot of research about that. And I was hoping to go to Dublin this summer, but that won't happen. So
I think I've enjoyed more when you get away from yourself. Like, you know, there's something more just purely enjoyable about storytelling than it really is.
There's a phrase about making the personal general and the general personal. Do you know that phrase, Dan?
Which is that? Not exactly.
It's kind of getting to that where even if you're writing a story that comes from yourself, your own life, you have to expand it to make it applicable to humanity, to your reader.
Right.
And if you're taking a very general theme like, you know, the inhumanity of man to man, you have to make it very personal.
Right.
So the reader feels it. And I think you've done that. And honestly, I think any good writer does. Like Lisa, your books may come from what you know from your family history.
Mhm.
They bring out humanity the same way, you know, like when everybody's drowning, we see that we understand why these people keep running into the water. We understand the heroism. And again, we think, which one am I going to be?
It's funny because I was going to say, yeah, but my story wasn't as dark. And yet then you brought up the drowning. There's some people by trains. There's a suicide. Yeah, okay.
Your book's pretty dark.
Yeah, I guess it is.
What's the name of it, Lisa?
It's called Without Words.
Word, one word, without word.
Without Words.
Word.
Yeah, you can.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. You can find it on the Gabriel's Horn
Okay.
publisher page.
Okay.
I actually have one amusing story on this topic, which is, although I don't think there's much of me in this book, 99% of it has nothing to do with, but I mentioned those restaurant ordering scenes, and they really do somewhat come from my mother, who can give the waiter a hard time in a restaurant.
I thought it was your
Just
father.
cringe when she does it. And my father, who's like difficult in a totally different way. And of course, they're ultimately these nice older Jewish couple. And I was mortified when my mother was going to read the book, like, oh, she's going to read that scene. I turned my mother into a Nazi. This nice Jewish woman, she became a Nazi. She's going to hate me. And the beauty of it was she read it and she said, and I think I was the one that asked her about those scenes because she hadn't mentioned it. And she said, well, I understand where you got the scene with the father, but I don't know where the scene from the mother came from. Like, she didn't recognize it. I was like, oh, thank God.
That's great.
Funny.
You know, this whole idea of humanity, people don't recognize themselves all too often.
Right.
How does the Beethoven concert in post-war Berlin fit into these overall themes?
I don't remember that part.
You don't remember the Beethoven concert?
No,
Hans
you-
goes,
One of the best parts of the book.
Oh,
I know, but I read it a few years ago. So what's the, tell me that scene.
There's an orchestra that puts together a concert, and it comes as the war has ended, and it's everything is in ruins, but these musicians actually managed to come together and put on a concert. So it's this amazing scene of, you know, returning to some semblance of social order.
right.
Some of them using instruments that he repaired, of course. And
Yeah.
there's
Right.
that sense of it too, that he had some part of it.
It was a
And there was
tragic
It's
night
Beethoven,
for
he-
Hilda. And
brilliant
maybe she
guy.
didn't realize it even at the time, but she kind of picked up on something.
Yeah, that's
But you
right.
could feel them separating that night more
Mhm.
than you had previously.
Right. But the other thing that I remember and was the feeling that like we're actually still alive. Like people aren't just like looking for food. They're actually somebody's trying
That's
to
right.
return to make music and do
That's the
something
instruments,
beautiful and
yeah.
everything.
Mhm.
We had a beautiful line there. I think it was, he realizes how powerful this moment is because I think he says we're not just surviving, we're starting to live again.
Right.
And I
To
thought
me,
that
like, it was ridiculous. To me, that was like a very emotional center of that moment. And the other moment was when he thinks like why did we have to do, kill millions of people to think we're the master race? Wasn't this enough just to
Wasn't Beethoven enough?
wasn't Beethoven enough?
That's
you
right.
know?
It's a great line.
Yeah.
That is a
I
great
love
line.
that. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and to me, it's like it so encapsulates humanity, like that's capable of the most incredible evil and the most unbelievable profundity and beauty.
Mhm, mhm.
what
Absolutely.
do you, the readers, make of Hans's relationship with Dawn?
Well, it was creepy.
Yeah.
And I wished he would have looked at her like instead of like a lover, I wish he would have looked at her in a grandfatherly way.
He did at the end.
Again, it's probably more realistic the way that it was written,
Right.
but
It definitely-
I didn't
yeah.
like reading it.
It made me uncomfortable, but I also thought it was more realistic that that's what's in his head and it wasn't going to deny it.
Exactly.
I changed the habits of a lifetime, Lisa.
What were you gonna say, Anne?
Well, I was, when I first read that, I did not like it at all. And I said, this is creepy and it's bad. And she cannot be 17. She has to be 20.
Oh, that's right.
And I said, look, she cannot be a teenager. She has to, if you're going to do this, she has to be 22. It's less creepy. And we went back and forth. And you said, I will compromise to 19. And I don't like it.
So, okay, I formally apologize to all of you for the creepy factor.
But at the end, I do think he was able to see her as a granddaughter only because he lost
Right.
all of his sexuality. So
Right.
because he was old enough that he couldn't do it anymore anyway, so he was able to see her as a granddaughter or a child or whatever.
Yeah, I thought that was what the transformation was written well. Like, yeah, it was realistic.
See, I mean, when he takes care of Andreas's son and her son that he's not related to, in a certain sense, it's redeeming, the fact that he walked out on his son. So,
Right.
I don't know.
Compensatory or redeeming?
I don't know. I don't dare with all of you admit that I didn't find it as creepy. So
The authorities have been notified.
Exactly.
Well, I definitely remember thinking the same thing, like, it's his chance to sort of be a kind person to a child in that way.
And yet it kind of, to Chris's point, if Dawn and the child had died, he would be alone, and it was all about self-preservation, by helping them, he helps himself.
But he does say, no, I have to live I can't leave them alone. He does have that thought. Like, I can't.
Yeah.
It comes to that point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Stands in contrast to Colin too.
I was going to ask, it's Catherine. Are you talking, Catherine?
Yeah, I didn't hear what Catherine said.
What did you say,
I
Catherine?
was just saying he stands in contrast to Colin Conrad at that point.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Not that we ever liked them.
They were funny, though. They were funny.
They were fun. I was going to ask you, Dan, what's the chess? Is there a point to the chess motif that runs through? I mean, we find out that he's like just below a grandmaster. But was there any other thing that you were working at with the chess thing
I
there?
have to admit, I probably just found it interesting in some way that I can't articulate. I mean, I personally love chess and I play chess, and just the notion of this old guy playing this young woman who is,
Very
just as
good.
good as he is, and has this, as well as being beautiful, is really very intelligent, and him imagining through the chess you know, what about her past and how she was in some way a version of his own son and all that. It just seemed
Sure.
interesting to me. I'm not sure there was more to it than that.
Mm.
I have two more questions before we wrap up. And I think I'm going to just throw these out for Dan because we're kind of running a little short on time. World War II is an endless stream of, you know, movies and novels. Why do you think World War II in particular draws so much attention?
I mean, to me, I'm having trouble articulating my thought about it. Like, for one, it's easy to, even though this book tries to get at a little more dimension, it does feel like it's about good and evil. You know, it is easy to see who were the bad guys and who were the good guys and that kind of thing. And it was just so, like, you know, even in Hitler's own words and in the book, it's total war. Do you want total war? And they all cheer yes. And like, what does it mean? And the absolute abject defeat of Germany and what that was about, you know, and what does it mean to, like, there's something so profound and so deep and extreme about it that I think it just keeps drawing people to it. I don't know. I mean, World War I, you know, just doesn't have the same, you know.
I think it was, you know, probably in part the level of just brutality, atrocity to try and literally wipe an entire group of people off the face of the earth.
Right.
I mean, in a way, it's been done before, but not in that calculated fashion.
And in a society, you know, there obviously was brutality equal to it, and if you go far enough back in history, but in this advanced society that had, you know, modern everything,
Because
science, and poetry, and art, and everything, you know, it's just continued to amaze.
I don't know if this resonates for any of you, but I'm a little bit obsessed with reading World War II novels. And I think one reason is because my father was in the war. And so it just sort of connects me back to that. And our parents' generation didn't talk about it really. So it connects me back to that time period.
I wonder if that has a lot to do with it. And, you know, maybe in the next 20, 30 years, maybe it's going to be Vietnam that all the books and novels are about.
Yeah.
Because I'm a little bit the same way. My dad was in Vietnam when I was born until I was 6 months old. And I do think that's had a profound impact on our family life, on life, even though I didn't remember it. They never played the news. I mean, I was embarrassingly old before I realized how long into my life the war actually lasted, because they really kept us sheltered from it. And it was, like you said, my dad never talked about it. We once opened a box of some of his stuff and we found he was actually very artistic, and he had drawn this little cartoon, and well, it was like an 8.5 by 10 of Snoopy saying war is hell or something like that, dressed in a military uniform. And that was like the most we ever knew up until that point. You know, it just was almost never mentioned. I knew he'd been there when I was born, and that was about it. And it does sort of shroud it in mystery.
Right. I mean, we had family friends with numbers on their arms that I went to a summer camp that was run by a Holocaust survivor, and a lot of the kids' parents were Holocaust survivors. So it was just our generation growing up in New York, I think that.
Yeah.
Dan, my last question, you and I talked about this, whether this was part of the issue, why this book is so good, why all these agents just loved the book. And one agent after another, this is the best book ever. I know I can sell this, and no publisher would take it. Do you remember what we talked about?
What? I mean, I remember the experience. I vividly remember it not getting published.
Yeah. One of the things you and I talked about was, are they afraid that because this doesn't just go, he was a Nazi, he's evil and bad,
Yeah.
that they were afraid that they would appear to be condoning it. And we just
Yeah.
that maybe you're the only person who could have written this book.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. I do remember feeling that. I don't remember it in the context of being turned down, you know,
Mhm.
by publishers. But I definitely remember thinking that, like, if a German person had tried to write this, I think it would not be
They couldn't
perceived
have.
well. It would be
Yeah, no, nobody would read it if a German had written it.
right.
And I think that gives you a voice where you're a little more credible, whether it's fair or not. I mean,
Yeah.
if you had written it, it would be the exact same story. It would be exactly as true.
Right.
They would be more open to the charge that, you know, you're just whitewashing.
Exactly.
Whereas because you are who you are,
Right.
people are more likely to say, okay, this is someone whose family was directly affected by this.
Yeah.
And even he is saying, let's look at the humanity of people.
Right.
There were some truly horrible people, and there were a lot of people who were afraid, who were
Mhm.
quiet, who were subject to the propaganda, didn't
Right.
pretend was up anymore.
Right.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, one of the other problems, and this is just bad luck, is that around the time when you were shopping this around, the book Thief came out,
Right.
Ah,
which had the same. It was about German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Person.
Right.
Same idea. I read the book. I don't remember, but it was a German young
Right.
man who, you know, was fighting for the Nazis. And so, unfortunately, at that time, I think that was a little bit of an issue.
The other book like that is All the Light We Cannot See.
And then
Mhm.
Jojo Rabbit just came out.
I was going to say, have you
Yeah.
seen Jojo Rabbit? Because that's
I
like
kind of
Jojo
one of those.
Rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
did.
like
I
that movie a
enjoyed it.
lot.
I
Yeah.
thought it was
Yeah.
good. I unfortunately saw it in an airplane, so the experience
Oh.
wasn't as,
Yeah, it was very
As good
I
as
wish
it
I'd
might
seen
have
it in
been.
the theater, but it's a very
I
good
wanted
movie.
to, I wanted to actually mention something for people who might be interested in that period. There's an amazing memoir written by a woman who was very young. She was late teens in the war, and she wrote a book called Hiding in Plain Sight. And her
oh
name is
yeah,
Betty
that was
Lauer.
really good.
And it's just an unbelievable story because it's
I'm looking it up.
she took lots of notes and then wrote this very long memoir, but it captures the sense of terror that people had just universally at the
So
time.
there's a whole bunch of books with that title, but who's the
Yeah.
author?
The author
Betty
was
Lauer.
But it's Lauer, Lauer.
Okay, let me see.
Yeah, that was really, really good memoir.
Yep, I found it. Okay. Yeah, there's about 7 or 8 books in Minuteman with that title, but oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a very common title. It's a fantastic book. It's one of the best memoirs of that period that I've ever
Oh,
read.
okay.
And it's interesting because it covers not just the war, but she survived the war. And so it's also her basically escape from an area that became under Soviet control, and which is the very end of the story. But it involves
Oh,
kind of reconciling herself to having lived through this experience and being able to then kind of reconnect and find humanity in the German people, having been a person who was just, survived really. I mean, she was Jewish and she survived by pretending that she was not.
Yeah, Corrie ten Boom is another one that really gets at that having to forgive.
What was that? What was it called?
Corrie ten
Hiding
Boom.
Place. What, The Hiding Place?
Yeah.
Corrie ten Boom, yeah.
Yeah. So any last questions for Dan before we wrap up?
Did you do the dishes?
I could see it as a movie. I've been told Danny that before.
Okay.
It was a great read.
I
Very good, Dan. Yeah,
Yeah.
very
And-
good.
Great meeting all of you. Chris, I'm gonna get that book out. That sounded like something I'm gonna like.
Oh, you should.
Yeah.
It's a classic.
What's it called again?
Earthly Powers.
Earthly
Okay.
Powers.
Normally I go and order books on my phone right from the library, but everything's closed, so
Yeah, surely.
I do that all the.
Well, good luck to all of you in the Midwest. I hope.
So Let me give a rundown of what's coming up. I believe next week, May 11th, is See the House by Judith Granahan, and it's sort of a corporate mystery where a new employee, one of the employees dies in a fiery crash on the mountainside, and the woman who takes her place accidentally discovers that something's going on in the finances, and so she has to outwit these killers. May 18th is Daughter Number 5, The Baby of the Family by Jenny Zach Kiley, and it is her memoir about being born on this farm with no running water and no electricity in
Oh, thank you.
Minnesota. I don't know what year exactly, 40s maybe. May 25th we have off. June 1st is My Gypsy War Diary by Sean D. Brink. And that it's almost a young adult novel, but it's a good read. It's the story of this kind of shy, lonely boy in Nebraska who becomes friends with his elderly neighbor and bit by bit stumbles onto this old family secret and this whole world underground and secret treasure and this long-standing betrayal and battle between, I can't tell you who, that would be a spoiler. And then for our spring session is June 8th, and that is Dream of Dragons by Loretta and Michael Kehoe. And that is a story about a man, it's sort of an allegory really, but it's about a man who is jogging along the Florida beach and finds a naked, helpless woman. And that's odd, and she doesn't know who.
I hope they're at least 22.
Yeah. Sorry?
I hope they're at least 22 years old.
There you go.
So anyway, she's completely helpless. She doesn't know who she is. And the police don't know what to do with her. So he takes her in and she learns to speak amazingly fast. And she learns to do everything very, very quickly. And she's having these dreams of golden dragons, and the dreams turn darker and darker. And it becomes sort of a fantasy story, except it's kind of dark in places. And I consider it an allegory. So, but it's an enjoyable read, whether you see it as that or just a story. So, yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
And nice to meet you all.
Thank you so much, Dan. Nice to meet you all, guys.
Nice to meet you. Bye.
Yeah.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye.